Hello, good people, and welcome to Hillbilly Cat History. Signed, sealed, remembered, Hollywood Image, Circle G Dreams. And so, for the last couple of episodes, we've been working our way through an article that was published in a magazine from Australia in March 1967. The beginning of the second month for Elvis on the Circle G. Hi, Keith. Hi, Gunn. Thank you so much for joining. Appreciate seeing you here. And we're going to continue with that magazine article today. Hi, Marion. Thank you so much for coming. Appreciate seeing you here. And this is the magazine, Movie News. And the article is Why Elvis Can't Come to Australia. And we've heard from Colonel Parker. And yesterday we heard from Elvis. And Keith saying, thanks for an extra show. Well, thank you for watching, Keith. So earlier today, I did a live stream. And what's earlier in the morning for me, of course, it's a different time for you guys all around the world. And I just played a lot of the songs that I've created to celebrate the life of Elvis. Something new I'm thinking about doing maybe a few times a week. And maybe at different times to see if we can pull in some different audience as well as the regulars, and kind of bond over the songs and over any chat that anybody wants to have. So it's more of an open forum. I don't really have a presentation per se for those videos, just to see how that kind of live stream goes. So if you guys are interested in that, just hopefully YouTube will tell you. If you're subscribed and you have the notification bell and it doesn't have the line through it, it's got a line through it, click it. That won't have a line through it, and hopefully they'll tell you when I'm on live. If it's outside of this regular 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time slot. And we have seen in past episodes that Australian fans, they've been clamoring for Elvis to visit since the 1950s, but he's never been. Even here in 1967, he hasn't made it. And Derek Hunter has to write an article for this Australian magazine about why Elvis cannot come to Australia. And Marion says that when I did the other show, it's definitely too early for her. I understand, Marion. But I might do some that are later, but I think that'll be too late for you if I do any that are later than now, so I'm just going to throw them out there and see who's there. And hopefully, if you guys have time and you want to watch them in the replay, you're always welcome to do that. And feel free to leave any comments, and I'll respond to everyone. And the big question is, why is there no Australian tour? Even though Colonel Tom Parker says we still continue to get many tempting offers for Elvis to visit your Australia and other countries. But Elvis's schedule of 3 movies a year, plus his recording sessions, take up most of his time. Basically, Tom Parker says Elvis is too busy. And Colonel Parker's working on a principle of scarcity, which will then add to the mystique of Elvis's career. You have to seek him out, and there's a limited number of appearances. And right now, they're not personal appearances. They're all on the silver screen. But that allows him to bring in a global audience, because people from everywhere are able to see him. Hi, Debbie. Thank you so much for coming. Appreciate seeing you here. And Colonel Parker even says that the American economy could suffer if Elvis were to go overseas, because Elvis now pays the U.S. government 91 cents out of every dollar he makes. And it could be unpatriotic to drop below that figure. And that neither the government nor Tom Parker is going to be happy if that happens. And in 1967, Elvis was like at the pinnacle of this production schedule of 3 movies per year. He'd been doing it since 1960. He'd been pumping these movies out. And he's got Double Trouble out there ready for release. He's got Easy Come, Easy Go ready for release. He's getting ready to start another movie. Ends up not starting that movie until after he gets married. But he's also got Clam Bake lined up. So that's a lot of movies in a short amount of time, and unfortunately that causes some of these movies to stack up in the theater and go into direct competition against each other. And that is not conforming to Colonel Parker's strategy of scarcity, because now the market is oversaturated during those periods, and Elvis is competing with himself. Hello, Anna. Thank you for coming. Appreciate seeing you here. But Colonel Parker promises that only when Elvis can build a big backlog of movies will he really have time to travel and make personal contact with the millions who adore him. And that between 1960 and 69, Elvis starred in 27 films. Of course, he had starred in 4 before he went to the Army, which was 1958. When he came back in 1960, started making movies again with GI Blues. And by the end of the decade, he's made 27. He's going to make 2 more touring films, feature-length motion pictures. And at this time, he's averaging 3 movies per year. Now, this is a rigorous schedule, and it truly is a rigorous schedule. And he's not flying between Hollywood and Memphis. He drives between Memphis and Hollywood during all of these years. There's maybe a couple of flights in here, but he's mostly driving everywhere that he goes. So it takes like a week to drive back and forth between Hollywood and Memphis. Maybe they could do it a couple days faster. They're going 24 hours a day, but they would typically stop and they would get hotel rooms in little hotels, little motels. And they would put aluminum tinfoil up on the windows in the bedroom that Elvis would sleep in. And sometimes this would be during the day. They would have traveled at night, and then they would stop during the day at some place like this and sleep. And then they'd take off again that night. And of course, they varied that style. They did it a lot of different ways because there were a lot of these trips. And this particular article has also mentioned the films Frankie and Johnny, California Holiday, which is not the name of an Elvis movie. So that must have been a working title. Paradise Hawaiian Style, and Flaming Star. Now, I say California Holiday is not the title of an Elvis movie, but maybe it was renamed in Australia. I don't know. So if you're from Australia and you know, and you've seen the movie California Holiday, let me know. Which movie is that? And that Elvis had become known for these happy-go-lucky musicals. But he really wanted to do more dramatic roles, and that's what we saw him talking about yesterday. When he said, I'd like to have a good death scene so that I could really go dramatic. But I went along with script changes, restoring happy endings to these films, because how can you argue with the most loyal and fanatical fans in the whole world? So Elvis has revealed to us his ache to do more in terms of artistic performance. And he lets us know that the major limitation, it's not himself, it's not his own abilities, it's the expectations of the fans. They don't want him to be involved in projects that are truly dramatic because they can have real cost and consequences associated with them, at least within the story. And the audience is imagining those costs and consequences to Elvis himself. If the character passes away, Elvis passes away, and it's too much for the fans. So how can he argue with the most loyal and fanatical fans in the whole world? He's got to keep doing these happy-go-lucky musicals, and that's what's preventing him from going to Australia right now. But Elvis said, "I did die in one picture. You'll recall Flaming Star. I was an Indian half-breed in the story, and my screen parents and I were killed at the finish. I don't know whether this had anything to do with it, but it's odd that this was the one picture that didn't make as much money as all my other films." Elvis is revealing to us with this statement that this is the business reason that has been given to him and that he must reluctantly agree with because he's seen the dollar figures about his movies, about the performance of his movies, and that by the only metric that's available at the time, the audience didn't like this movie because they didn't put their dollars into it. And Keith says that EP was shot at the end of Love Me Tender. And that's true, Keith, but they had to change the ending of that movie and soften it in order to get the audience to accept it. And that's where the lesson was learned, not to have Elvis die in a movie. Now, they still tested that, but that's where the lesson was learned. And Marion says, "Being a little older, I would love to see Elvis in dramatic roles today. And I think I could get over his dying in them." I think people might have been able to then as well, or that Elvis could have still gone ahead and done those movies if he was willing to take that financial hit. But we've talked about the reasons that he needed that money and what he was doing with it and how it was important to keep that money running. So he's doing a lot of good with the money. So there are other reasons that are combining into these business decisions. And at this point, he's contractually obligated in 1967. He's already reaped all the benefits of the contracts because most of them were front-loaded, where he gained all the money at the beginning of the contracts. So he's at the end of this cycle, the end of these guarantees. And he's chafing underneath the portions of the contracts that are still left. But at the same time, at the very end of January, Colonel made a new deal with RCA, and Elvis is now being guaranteed $300,000 a year in dollars from those days, $300,000 up front every year against what he's going to make in royalties. So RCA is basically saying, we're assuming you're going to make more than $300,000 in royalties, and at the end of the year, we'll settle up, and we'll give you whatever else we owe you, but we're just going to pay you $300,000 now. We're not going to do all this accounting in the middle, and then we'll do it all at the end of the year. And Elvis thinks this is fantastic because he doesn't have to wait for the money to come in. And so does the Colonel. So now they've locked themselves into this 13-year contract with RCA. So Elvis does enjoy the security of contracts. He just doesn't like being at the end of this one. And Memphis Flash Richie, welcome Richie, is saying that California Holiday was spin out. And it was changed in the UK from spin out to California Holiday. Interesting. Interesting. Because I think they called that same movie something else earlier. So that is very interesting. And Gunn saying that I believe a real Elvis fan would go to the dramas, not the singing, but we don't just want him to die in the end, but I could get over it just to see Elvis. Well, if it was a good story, right? Like, it's all about the story. And that's what Elvis is wanting. He's wanting a story, but right now he's got musical comedy. And despite his fame and fortune, Elvis said that he lived a clean living lifestyle with early to bed, early to rise, and that kept him looking youthful at age 32. However, we know that he doesn't actually do an early to bed, early to rise kind of regime. He may try to do early to bed, early to rise, but we know that there's a lot of late nights, that he likes to live at night. Now, he is changing his schedule somewhat for the movies. He definitely does change the schedule during the actual filming, and because that's done during the day. But as we know, he's always had trouble sleeping, so an early to bed doesn't necessarily mean he gets to sleep early. An early to rise, well, that probably means somebody is giving him an amphetamine, because he's got to now wake up at a very specific point in time. That's not within this article. Those are just things we know from other episodes that we've seen already in this series. And then Elvis said that after he got home, after a day on set, each night when I finish work, I'm glad to get straight home and have dinner, watch an hour or two of television, then plop right into bed. And I think Elvis is telling us the preferred schedule of almost every working adult in the world. Definitely in America. You want to get home after you're done working, have some dinner, maybe have a couple of hours of television with the family, and then drop into bed so that you can do it all again the next day. And Elvis says, I think, too, of all the people who depend on me. I don't ever want to let them down. I owe everything I have to a lot of people who have devoted their time and money towards furthering my career. And that's where we left off yesterday, with Elvis reminding us that he's not doing this just for himself, that he has responsibilities. There are people who depend on him. And they're not just people that he pays directly, and he's got them all in mind. And that's why he's got to be on this set at a certain time in order to get this film made. And at that moment in time when he gives the interview, he seems to be still happy with the studio system, even though he's maybe not looking forward to the next movie. But this is in November 1966. And then he comes home and he spends the holidays. And at the end of the holidays, towards the end of January, right at the beginning of February, as he's been buying all these horses, he sees the cross at the Circle G and he purchases the Circle G. And he begins to build a dream there. And as the dream comes to fruition, as he begins to see it take shape physically, he becomes less and less ready to go back to do the movies, even gaining weight during this initial period. Although he's always struggled with the weight, and he knows that he's got to get in shape for this movie. And he has certain things that he does, but he's not doing any of them. Hi, Luann. Thank you for coming. Appreciate seeing you here. Hi, Pat. Thank you for coming. I appreciate seeing you here, too. And to go on with this article, the author says that Elvis is tremendously impressed by his fans' devotion and genuine interest in his well-being. And so is his mentor, Colonel Parker, who told me later, Elvis's personal life is above reproach. He minds his own business and concentrates on doing a good job at all times. He is one of the most durable stars who will last and last. A star who has kept his nose clean. He has a remoteness that stimulates curiosity, and he has never let his success go to his head. He has stayed the nice and considerate guy he was when I first met him. So the Colonel has some high praise for Elvis. That his personal life is above reproach. He minds his own business. And that he's still the same nice and considerate guy he was when the Colonel met him in 1955. When his career was just beginning. And the article goes on. There was some talk recently that Colonel Parker was considering selling out his interest in Elvis. And here's what the Colonel said. Yes, I heard that. But what utter rubbish. Why, I even read somewhere that I was supposed to be selling him out to Brian Epstein, the Beatles manager. Hi, Terry. Thank you so much for coming. Appreciate seeing you here. So the Colonel's saying that there's a rumor out there that the Colonel's going to sell off his interest in Elvis to Brian Epstein, who is currently managing the Beatles. And of course, Brian and the Colonel have met. Or maybe they haven't met yet. I can't remember the date of that. So if you remember the date that the Beatles met Elvis, pop it into the chat so that we'll all remember together. But Brian Epstein is managing the largest supergroup on Earth, musical supergroup. The Colonel is managing the largest superstar all by himself. But he's the largest superstar on Earth. And Brian looks up to the Colonel. And the Brian has learned lessons from the Colonel. And eventually, Brian will pass away early in life, long before he should have. And the Beatles, who will have, by this point for sure, have met the Colonel. And John Lennon, who famously said that he did not like the movies that Elvis was doing, that he preferred Elvis when he was a rock and roller in the 1950s. They didn't like where his career was taking him. All four of those guys, the Beatles, decided that the best person that could possibly manage them in Brian's absence would be Colonel Parker. But Colonel Parker turned him down. So a lot of people dislike Colonel Parker and they say that he's a cheat. But if he was a cheat, why did the Beatles want to do business with him after they met him in person? And Brian Epstein spent some time that night when they met with Colonel, and he would have told him everything he thought about the Colonel. And yet when the crisis came, they asked the Colonel to take over. So that's just something to think about the Colonel. But not directly connected to this story, other than he just happened to mention Brian Epstein. And Gunn says that it sounds like the movie years were a good time for Elvis, having normal day and night routines, except for the weight wearing, of course. In Memphis, Richie says, I didn't like Beatles movies either. They were crap, so John is talking rubbish. Well, I agree that the Beatles movies, they were far inferior to Elvis movies. I would definitely agree with that. And I've often wondered, once they started doing those movies, if John regretted what he had said about Elvis, because he had said that at an earlier time, that he didn't like those movies. But back to this article. It says, there have also been rumors that Elvis would soon embark on a program of personal appearances. But Parker shook his head. Colonel Parker said, "We wish it was possible." "Oh, it might be later on. And in fact, we have talked about it. We do discuss these things, you know. It's not a case of Elvis blindly bowing to my wishes in handling his career. I never neglect his feelings and opinions. And our professional decisions are arrived at together." So those are some interesting thoughts from the Colonel, straight from his mouth, that most likely Elvis knew were published in this magazine, and we can assume that Elvis approved of these statements. Not saying that what the Colonel said was true, but saying that Elvis and Colonel Parker agreed together this would be their public face. And that face is that they do discuss things together, that Elvis does not blindly bow to the Colonel, that the Colonel remembers Elvis's feelings and his opinions, and he takes them into consideration, and that all professional decisions are arrived at together. Elvis is not taking orders. And the Colonel goes on, getting back to the question of overseas tours. With Elvis's success have come thousands and thousands of demands on his time. It just isn't humanly possible for him to reach and see everyone. Believe you me, he does want to go out and meet his fans face to face, and I guess he eventually will. Knowing what we know about the future, this is a very interesting statement, because the Colonel's telling us that face-to-face interaction with the fans is important to Elvis, and Elvis is telling the Colonel, we're doing these movies right now, but we've got to do some face-to-face, that I need face-to-face with the fans, that I'm gonna get this face-to-face time. It's not happening with these movies. I appreciate the money. We got to get some face-to-face time. And it's coming out of the Colonel in this public interview. And then the Colonel says, I guess he eventually will. Which I think is a statement that there is no containing Elvis. That the Colonel, he's not driving this wagon. He's not in charge here. Elvis is in charge, and eventually he's going to do what the Colonel's telling him not to do, which is do the face-to-faces. Now, the Colonel may be telling him, we want this money, we want to do these movies. And Elvis is telling him, I want to do the face-to-face. I'm getting to the point that I don't care about the money anymore. And the Colonel, he sees that no one can stop a hurricane, and it's coming. And he guesses that Elvis eventually will, and Elvis does. He returns to the stage 2 years from now, and he sets the world on fire with his performances. And he determines what a live show looks like out in the world now. He becomes the model for rock and roll entertainment. He recaptures his title as King of Live Performances. And that's about to happen. And the Colonel is telling us in this article in probably 66 that he said it, but going into 67, that it's coming to a head. And he's only going to be able to keep Elvis contained into these movies for a little bit longer. And Keith's saying that the Colonel sure did keep a tight schedule with Elvis, and Luann says that's what fame does. Whether it was for good or bad for your health, only wrongdoings from Tom Parker and his life's being in the country and bossy sound by look at his photos. And Gunn is asking, Elvis is in charge? Well, Elvis is the boss. Colonel Parker works for Elvis. but he's signed into contracts and he has to be a consummate professional and he has to fulfill the contracts that he's agreed to. Now, he willingly agreed to the contracts, but maybe he doesn't like them anymore. I've been in a lot of contracts I later wish I hadn't signed. In Memphis Flash, Richie says it just makes you think he really needed, as a human being, to get away for a couple of years and get back to being himself. It's so sad he was surrounded with idiots. Sorry that's how you feel. Poor Elvis. I think that's what he was trying to do here on the Circle G, Richie. He was building a place that he could get away. And Luann says, the only thing I like about the Beatles is the cartoon. Oh, Luann, that cartoon was awful. That's terrible. But the caricatures were actually very good, though. I mean, you definitely could tell which Beatle each one was, which was difficult in person when they all had the same haircut. Hi, Linda. Thank you for coming. I appreciate seeing you here. And Keith says the comeback special without Christmas songs, which the Colonel wanted for that special. Did he really want Christmas songs for that special, Keith? What if I showed you some paperwork that would indicate to you that those Christmas songs have been cut out of the broadcast, like way at the beginning of the cycle, like before Bender even came on board? Maybe I'll get around to bringing all that out someday. It'll be part of this series, signed, sealed, remembered. And Marion says, I don't like the Colonel, but I think lots of the accusations need to be reviewed. And Luann stands by. She likes the cartoon Beatle. Let's talk about the Colonel and what else he's saying. Colonel says, but I think that part of his long-lasting success is that Elvis has not toured around as frequently as other artists. We have found a formula for success, and we are trying to stick to it. He has become a legend in his own time and stayed on top through just his movies and records. He's never taken on the overexposure of television, stage, or personal tours. So the Colonel reveals to us a strategy that I would say is exactly the opposite of every single other artist who has ever tried to become famous. We don't want to tour. If we tour, Elvis will be less famous. Elvis is a legend because he's not touring. That's what the Colonel is telling us in so many words. That Keith's figured out a strategy that isn't what anybody else thinks the strategy should be, and it's working because they're bringing in lots of money. That's what working means. Brings in lots of money. And Gunn says, but Elvis let Parker decide many things instead of Elvis, didn't he? And Elvis didn't argue with him. Well, I don't know, Gunn. Did he? I mean, that's one of the reasons that we're doing this series, so that we can look at the contracts. Now, we're in Circle G, which is a detour. It's been a very long detour, and we don't get to see a lot of documents in this part of the detour. But when we get back to looking at contracts, I think you'll see that Parker didn't, whatever Parker decided, Parker advised, and Elvis decided. Now, he may have given up agency, especially in the 1970s. But that doesn't mean he didn't have the opportunity to make those decisions. And that he still actively said, no, someone else do it. Parker didn't just make decisions without running them through and alerting Elvis as to what he was doing. And Gunn says it's not true that he was a legend because he was not traveling or not touring the world. Yeah, I agree with that, Gunn, but Parker has taken two facts and he stuck them together and he's shown a causality that you and I are saying is not true. But he is saying is true And I think it exemplifies the way people in today's society see it all the time. Two facts are pulled, and it's said that there's a link between them. Is there a link? Is that link causal? Does one create the other? Or are they connected in the sense that there's a cause that creates them both? Right? We don't know any of that. We just know that there's these two facts, and Parker's put his spin on it. And that was part of Parker's magic. And Parker goes on to say that Elvis's records and movies continue to make big money, but one wonders if he might have remained the so-called king if he had tried to make himself more available, attempting to take on all the glories of an all-around entertainer. So, God, it's almost as if Colonel has spoken directly to what you have said, and he says, no, it's not true. What we might have to wonder is if he had done these personal appearances like you wanted him to, maybe he wouldn't be famous now. And Gunn's saying that Parker forced him to work too much, didn't he? Being sick and all, didn't think Elvis wanted to, but did it anyway. Again, I don't think that Parker made him work. Parker set up the ability to work. And Elvis wanted to do the work because that's the way the money was earned. And Elvis needed that money in order to make the dreams come true and to take care of everybody. And it goes back to Elvis's 3 dreams. You know, he had 3 basic dreams in his life. And these were from the point that he turned 18, when he became a man. One was to take care of his mother. He wanted to buy her things, to make her rich, to get her a big house. But mostly, he just wanted to see that she didn't suffer. And that was kind of the extent of the dream when he was 18, because he didn't know he'd become famous. He assumed he'd be a truck driver or a plumber. That's kind of what it was looking like. And at the moment he turned 18, it wasn't even looking that good. So his second dream was to marry a woman like his mother. And he looked all year when he was 18 for that woman. And he found her at the very end of the year, and that was Dixie Locke. And he dated her all year that he was age 19. And that's the year that he became famous. And if he had not become famous that year, I am fairly certain he would have married Dixie Locke. And they would have had a family that would have resembled the family he grew up in, maybe with more children. And he would have been having those children to please Gladys, as well as himself, and Dixie. But his third dream was to be famous, to be an entertainer, perhaps to be in the movies. But he had a smaller dream at that moment, which was just to get onto the radio. And he started working that dream. But he was working them all and taking steps towards getting every one. And then when his mother died, well, now he could no longer take care of her. And he had to deal with that somehow. And how would he deal with that? Well, he stretched out his wings. He decided that if he couldn't take care of his mother, he'd already been taking care of a lot of other people. He was just going to make it this thing. He was going to take care of everybody. And you can see that within his actions. He never tells anybody that. He never goes out there and makes a statement about it. But he begins to gather in more and more people. And then here at the Circle G, he's trying to create a whole village of people that he's going to protect. And he's got to go do these movies and stuff to create the money that's going to take care of all the ancillary people, everyone that's connected. So I don't know if it's Parker forcing him to do that, as much as this is his lifelong dream, and this is how he is fulfilling it. And Luann says you only got to listen to Tom Parker and Elvis's New York interview when Tom Parker butted in. Yeah, he sure did butt in. And Gunn says Parker needed that Elvis money too. I don't deny any of that. I'm not saying that Parker's a good person. I'm just saying that Parker may not be the villain that many people are primed to believe that he is. That he was also a 3-dimensional character. And I recently posted a post about Ed Bonja. And if you watch the video that's connected to the post, it's Ed Bonja talking about Elvis and Colonel Parker. And Ed Bonja was the nephew of Tom Diskin. Tom Diskin was Elvis or Colonel Parker's right-hand man. And Ed makes it clear in the first few minutes of the video that his family might have starved if it hadn't been for Colonel Parker. So there were good parts and there were bad parts to Colonel Parker. But we can't forget that Elvis himself, we've already heard it. Nobody could tell Elvis what to do. So Elvis did abdicate responsibility at times. And he went along with the flow because he felt it was easier. But those were his decisions as well. And we've got to honor it all because that's what makes the full person. And I think we've probably all been there where we don't want to have to make every decision. We don't want to have to make decide everything. We let others do things for us. But sometimes we end up places that we don't want to be. And Richie's saying that it wasn't his dream to be stuck in Bloody Vegas. Well, again, Richie, I don't know that he was stuck in Bloody Vegas. They made new contracts all the time in Vegas, and he continued to sign them. So it wasn't just Colonel Parker. And there's this myth that Colonel Parker had these gambling debts, but no one's ever actually shown a gambling debt. And he's saying, who was Parker's right-hand man? Tom Diskin. His name was Tom. Tom was, he was a diplomat. He was the kind of guy that could come in between two men who were having an argument. And by the time Tom was done talking, all three would be friends. So when you think about Colonel Parker and how gruff he was, Tom was exactly the opposite. And that's why Tom and Colonel worked so well together. They were good cop, bad cop. Tom was the good cop, and when things were going to go smooth and easy, Colonel sent Tom in. And when Tom had to escalate the situation, that's when the Colonel came in. And he didn't want the Colonel to come in because he was going to be gruff and he was going to think business first. Tom had a personal side. He would consider your emotions and what you needed and listen to your problems. Colonel wasn't going to do all that. And it's not that Colonel didn't do that. It's that they'd set up this routine and Colonel wasn't doing it. And that's who Tom Diskin was. And Tom, he spent a lot of time with Elvis. He was an older man. He's probably 20 some years older than Elvis. And I imagine that he probably gave, especially in the 50s, he gave Elvis a lot of good advice. You know, about different life things. And Elvis would have probably listened to Tom because he was a very friendly, very knowledgeable, very able to talk kind of person. He was a conversationalist. And I'm sure that because he was there throughout the entire... There's only a few people that make it the whole career. Elvis, Vernon, Colonel, Tom Diskin. And Richie's saying that Elvis had lost faith in everything by 74. I think he lost faith in a lot of people by then. I would definitely agree with that. And Luann's saying that the 50-50 agreement really made Tom Parker look bad. And very possibly true. I mean, especially once it got out into the public after Elvis passed away. But before that, of course, it was private. Nobody knew. But that also makes you wonder if Elvis was resentful of that part of the contract while he was out there on Circle G and he didn't talk about it to anyone. You know, is that part of what he's writing out when he gets the saddle sores? And Gunn saying that she thinks Elvis needed Parker in the beginning, but that he surely could have been okay and even better later without him. That's one of the great mysteries, right? And hopefully we'll have a better idea of that as we continue through the series. Haven't really got to see much of the Colonel yet. And Linda says that she doesn't know anything about the Colonel except the 2022 movie. And that really made him look like a villain. And so I would point out that Joel from EPE recently told one of the fans who had asked him why they have displays about the Colonel because he was such a villain, is that Joel appreciates all the fans that are coming through the movie, and that the movie is a glorious movie, but that it's a movie and a story, and that the Colonel, when you see the actual documentation, isn't the person that's on that screen, and that he didn't do a lot of those things that made him look like the villain. And Joel freely admits that. And I'm not a huge fan of Joel. I'm not a huge fan of him, but he's been with Graceland a long time. He's seen a lot of the archives. And he seems to think that there's different things for us to learn about the Colonel that are not out there right now. And of course, the number one Elvis writer in the world right now, just published a new book that's all based on letters from the Colonel, which he says will bring a brand new perspective. I've not read the book yet. Don't even have it, to be true. So I haven't looked at it yet, but I have seen a lot of letters that the Colonel wrote that other people haven't seen, and they're very interesting. And Flash Richie is saying that he wasn't even a colonel, though, was he? Well, yeah, he was. I mean, I don't even know what that means when people say that he wasn't a colonel. 2 different governors of 2 different states conferred a colonelship on him. Now, is that a colonel in the U.S. Army? No. Is it a colonel in the National Guard? No. It's a title, and it means Southern Colonel. And Tennessee granted the same honor to Elvis Presley. So if we say that the colonel wasn't a real colonel because it was from these 2 governors, then we have to discount the honor that the governor of Tennessee gave to Elvis. And so, yes, the colonel was a real colonel. He was allowed to use the title colonel. Elvis could have used the title colonel. He just chose not to. And why would he? He already had the best title of all, Elvis. He didn't need another title. Colonel was just a Tom Parker. He was just a guy. He needed that title in order to bring what he would have seen as equality in the boardroom of these city slickers in Hollywood and at RCA. So I would say that, yes, the colonel was a real colonel. And Linda says that you don't see very much of the colonel at Graceland. And she wonders if that was Lisa Marie's choice. Well, you actually do see a lot, Linda. You just don't know it. Because they bought all of the colonel's collection. And some of that collection shows up throughout the museums and the displays. So a lot of that wasn't original to EPE. It came through a deal, and they bought it all from the colonel. And Marion's saying that she believes only 50-50 of what is shown in the Elvis movie. You would be safer to believe only about 15% of what is shown in the Elvis movie. And most of it, I would think, is in the belt buckle, which isn't real either. But that's my favorite part, is the designs that he has with the jewels and stuff. Those are lovely. I love all that stuff. But the facts are very loose within that movie. And Linda's saying that reviews of the new book are that the author may have been very generous towards the colonel. And those reviews are written by people who've accepted what all the other books have to say, I would think. He knew that this was not going to be a popular book when he put it out. But at the same time, I think we have to look back at his body of work. And we have to understand that he's number one an Elvis fan. He's a huge fanboy of Elvis. So he's not a fanboy of the colonel. He's also a huge fanboy of Sam Phillips, who would be like the diametric opposite of the colonel. So I don't know. I don't know who else could have wrote that book though. And Gunn says it doesn't matter if he was a colonel or not. And Linda's saying that's interesting. I only saw one thing that said colonel on it, but good to know Graceland bought a lot of his belongings. Supposedly all of them. Everything that he had to do that had anything to do with Elvis. Pat's saying that she doesn't know much about Parker, so can't really comment. And Marion's saying only 15% of the movie. Yeah. Yeah, I would say, 50% is very generous, I would say. But I think, I don't know if you ever watched the Ali movie with Will Smith, which I thought was just a fabulous movie. My assumption is like 15% of that one's true as well. But it's not about these movies. They're not there to show you factual truth. That's not what a movie is. A documentary, I mean, you could have some expectation of factual truth within a documentary, but that's not what this is. This is an entertainment movie. And it's a biopic, which means that's a word that means it's not real. And whenever you watch a movie and it says based on a true story, that means the story you're about to see is absolutely not true. It is fiction. That it's based on a true story, and they could tell you the true story if they wanted to, but they're not telling you the true story. They're telling you something that's based on the true story. It's kind of like when you buy products and they say made with real metal, but they don't tell you what kind of metal they are, something like that, right? Made with real pieces of ham or something like that in food product. But that's a good way to think about a movie in terms of facts. If there's any facts in it, it's the equivalent of hamburger, right? They've ground this thing down to nothing by the time they get it into the movie. But what there is the emotional journey. And that movie did do a fairly good job of capturing the emotional journey of Elvis. That he started out very innocent, and he got his innocence was taken within the time of his career, and that he wrestled with who he was before the career and who he was after the career, and that there were people who took advantage of him, in this case embodied by the Colonel. But there absolutely were people that were taking advantage of him. I mean, that's absolutely true. So all of the experiences that he has outside of the facts and the dates, well, those ring very true. And that's what the movie is supposed to do for you. And Memphis Flash Richie is saying maybe the Elvis movie should have showed how Parker got to America in the first place and what he did before anyway. Well, he was just a kid before. And and I understand that people have accused him of murdering people, but that's a very, very thin thread that they have attached to him to try to make it look that way. But the truth is, he was just a child. I mean, he was like 18 years old, and he jumped ship and came to America. And he ended up coming back to America, and then he served in the armed forces. And then he got thrown out for mental deficiencies. So yeah, he definitely had a life of struggles at the beginning, but I don't know that he killed anybody, as has been rumored. And Keith says that the Colonel died without much to show, and that he had standing debts from casinos, and he married his secretary who took good care of him. Well, he didn't have any standing debts from casinos, Keith. In fact, casinos were giving him a free room for his entire life, as well as a free office. So he didn't owe them anything. And he died with a lot of money. He had millions of dollars. So when we say that the Colonel died without much to show, well, that's not true. And in fact, Elvis's estate had to pay the Colonel millions of dollars. That's where he got some of it. But he already had millions. So he was a very rich man when he died. Very rich. And Richie agrees that everyone was taking advantage of Elvis. Full stop. and that Elvis deserves so much more, and it's so sad. I think he was trying to do a lot more than most people see, and that a lot of it was private, and that he was trying to create a good life for his family. And I don't think he had any idea that the end was coming so soon. I think he thought he had a lot of time to work things out. And so it is sad that he had to leave us before he got to work out all his dreams. And I think he was about to make some big changes. And I think it was going to be like the changes when he went to live performances. He was about to step into a new arena. Something fresh was about to happen. And we don't know what it was. I'm not even sure he knew what it was. I think he was in a moment at the end of his life, like he was here at the Circle G, where he was preparing himself. He was getting ready. And like at the Circle G, when he stepped off, he didn't know he was going to go do the comeback special. But when the opportunity presented itself, he snatched it. And Linda's saying that she thinks the movie was popular for younger people. Well, I think it was too. He keeps asking, what was the lawsuit Colonel had against EP? Well, it's for the money. So they sued him, and it was about the 50-50 contract and all that, and blah, blah, blah. So this was after Elvis passed away. So eventually we'll reach this within the Mystery of August 16th, 1977 series. But they sue the Colonel, so he countersues for the money that they owe him, because he had floated millions of dollars to Elvis in order to fund the payrolls and stuff. And it's not that Elvis didn't have it, it was a cash flow issue. These rich people had this money, that just was tied up in different things. It was hard to get, even for a rich person, it's hard to get $1 million together. In raw cash, in fungible money that you can just move around. And back then, you didn't even have the opportunity of like the wire transfers and stuff like they do today, right? It's much more difficult to move the money around. So Colonel had loaned Elvis millions. Elvis was using that to do the payrolls and stuff. It was going to be made up on future projects, which should also indicate that the Colonel, he believed there were major future projects coming, and he didn't believe that he wasn't going to be part of that. Otherwise, he wouldn't have loaned the millions, right? So, at least on the Colonel's side, if Elvis was going to get rid of him, he had no idea. So Elvis would have totally come out of left field at him with that. And Richie's saying that Elvis should have been in the hospital and not as on stage. And he probably should have, but as we've discussed in previous episodes, there's nothing they could have done for him because they didn't have the equipment or the expertise at that point in time. And he wasn't in the hospital at that moment because he chose not to be in the hospital. It's not that the Colonel chose for Elvis not to be in the hospital. Elvis said, I'm not going to the hospital. Apparently he'd had problems a few days before, but he said, I'm not going. But that's the end of our time today. We've come to the end of another hour. This has been a great discussion. I really appreciate it, guys. Especially you, Richie. I know that you've been a fan for a really long time, and so I appreciate the knowledge that you bring. And I would, and she said, Linda's saying that she agrees with Richie. It's an absolute tragedy. And that she doesn't like, is it the movie that you don't like? But don't want to hurt my feelings? I don't think it's that great a movie. That's what she's saying. I don't think any of the Elvis movies have ever been that great a movie. I think that the story that we've already heard about Elvis pulling everybody around in a wagon at Christmas time, that would be a great movie. But that's never been in a movie. And Linda's asking about surgery or CT scan. They didn't know what was wrong with Elvis, and they didn't have the CT scans back then. They had them, but they were brand new. And people that were doing GI stuff, they weren't using them. They were almost exclusively used for brains. And so the only people who knew how to read them were the brain guys. It's possible that he could have found a GI guy, and that GI guy would have used a CT scan and then would have seen it. But then they would have very rarely done the kind of procedure that Elvis would have needed. So they would have been scared to death to do that as well. So it's possible they could have done something, but that wouldn't have helped his enlarged heart either, or some of the other issues that he had. Yeah, and it's not just that Elvis didn't have any idea how sick he was. The medical community didn't know. They couldn't figure it out. But I am going to leave you guys with a song so that we can go out of here with a smile. I'm going to do one of my favorites, which is He Gave Away His Heart. And it's about the very last concert he ever did at the Hilton, when the American Heart Association was there and they gave him a plaque because he'd helped raise money for the AMA or AHA. And he gave them jewelry from his fingers and pieces of himself, different costumes and sunglasses to sell off to raise even more money. That's how much he believed in it. And this song's called He Gave Away His Heart.
Midnight lights, rhinestone fire, Arabian suit, burning with desire. He hit the stage like thunder rolls. Vegas shook and the story unfolds. Charlie's birthday, crowd went wild. He cracked a joke, then sang with style. But just before he sang Hurt So Deep, he stopped the show and made us weep. He gave away his heart, not just a song, diamonds and gold, where the love belongs. Rings and shades from the man backstage. He healed the broken, he lit the flame. Oh, he gave away his heart, and I saw it all that night. Blackened hair, the man stepped near. Elvis smiled, the crowd could hear. Thanks to you, we raised the light. 17,000 hearts took flight. Then back behind the velvet door, he gave away a little more. Music ring, a boxcar shine, a suit that held his sacred time. He gave away his heart, not just a song, diamonds and gold, where the love belongs. Rings and shades from the man backstage. He healed the broken, he lit the flame. Oh, he gave away his heart, and I saw it all that night. He didn't need applause to know his worth. He gave away his soul in Vegas mirth. Not just a king, but something more. A man who knew what hearts were for. Gave away his heart, not just a soul. Pieces of love where the brave belong. Ritual gifts from the man backstage. He saved the hurting, he the flame. Oh, he gave away his heart, and I'm gave away his heart, and it burned so bright.